This is lecture 41, and in the last class we were talking about solid fuel combustion, and in that context I had told you a little bit about pulverized fuel combustion in a boiler, in a utility boiler. So it's a situation like this. This is the boiler, and here you send coal particles, pulverized coal particles, which are micron size, along with primary air, and then you have combustion zone here, you have flame ball, and then the particles keep moving through this and they get burned. So the combustion, actually, as discussed in the last class, depends on two things. Depends on the combustion of the volatile matter, which is essentially what this flame is. This is a volatile matter flame. And then you have charred combustion. This is the particles which have already lost their volatile matter. They still burn, they still keep burning, and that's a charred combustion process. So that charred combustion happens in the flame zone, happens a little bit beyond that also, and that charred combustion process, in fact, is the most time consuming. And what I told you in the last class is that because the charred combustion process takes a lot of time, to give these coal particles enough time, you have to make the combustion zone tall. That was the basic idea. Because the time that you want to give for the charred particles to burn will depend on the velocity field that you have, on the magnitude of velocity, and also the volume that you are given. So that will translate to height. So that's why boilers are so tall. Now, these are the qualitative features which we discussed in the last class, but today we'll like to also see more quantitative aspects of charred combustion specifically, and some trends of actual experiments. But before we do that, we'll see a short video, just portion of the video, again from the IISc collection. So it's called Understanding Combustion. This is part 3 on solid fuels. This is also available on YouTube. So we'll just go to that now. So now the visible flame is gone. So you see the glow. So this is charred combustion. That flame was volatile matter combustion. So the clock on the oxygen side has stopped at 16.20. All right, I think this is sufficient. This is just to give you a visual picture of how that combustion process looks like. So one thing that you will remember from this is that char combustion is actually more like the glowing combustion, and the flaming combustion is the volatile matter combustion, when you get a visible flame around the particle. This was of course a stationary particle. This was fixed on a rod, and then the whole thing was kept on a weighing balance, so that they were getting the mass also. They were getting the mass as a function of time. From that they can get reactivity. So they can get the initial mass of the particle, and they can also get the instantaneous mass of the particle. And from that they can find out how the instantaneous mass divided by initial mass, that is m divided by mi, changes as a function of time. So that tells you something about reactivity. So that tells you that okay, initially it will be something, and then when the volatile flame goes off and you get char combustion, then it will be something else. Okay, so the changes will be picked up by m divided by mi. So that is quite clear. Now we will go to this context again. Our context is actually, we are discussing coal particle combustion in this pulverized form in an utility boiler. So I also said in the last class that the processes that happen is actually sequential. So the particle will first lose moisture, so that is drying, then there is devolatilization, there is also char combustion. These processes happening sequentially. Now before we go in more detail to the boiler situation, we will just look at some cases of some experiments with particles, actually. Some experiments with particles where pyrolysis is done and char combustion is done. So this is one. All right, so if you look at it, this is actually for a pine cube. So pine wood, so cube of that, a cube size pine wood. This is 10 mm size, and this is burned in air at 1100 Kelvin. So you have an air stream at 1100 Kelvin, and you suspend that pine cube, 10 mm cube, in that stream. The Reynolds number, calculated Reynolds number, is 120. And let's see what all are plotted. The top one, this shows you normalized mass, so as a function of time. So this normalized mass as a function of time is what? It's the instantaneous mass divided by the initial mass. So that's why it goes up to 1. And these are moisture contents. 200%, 15%, and 0%. These are moisture content. So if you have, compared to the weight of the dry wood particle, if you have 200% moisture, then that's the top curve. And if you have that much amount of moisture, you will see how the normalized mass goes down as a function of time. If you have less moisture, then this is the rate, and if you have dry wood situation, then this is the rate. If it is dry, then it's more like pyrolysis happening. But in other cases, there is also drying taking place. And if there is more moisture, then the rate of mass loss is less. If there is less moisture, then it's more pyrolysis. So the drop that you see, the slope that you see, is actually higher. And that's normalized mass, m by mi. If you do a ddt of that, if you take a derivative of this with respect to time, then you get the burning rate. So what is that burning rate? It's 1 over mi dm dt. That's the burning rate, isn't it? So that you can get directly by differentiating the curve which you got in the first plot. The first plot was m over mi as a function of time. So differentiate that, you will get the normalized burning rate. And again, you will see that the normalized burning rate tells you that the dry one goes faster. And then there is another plot which shows you the moisture coming out, and then there is also CO2, and then this some CO. So where is the CO2 coming from? CO2 is coming from the pyrolysis process, releasing some CO, and then that CO getting oxidized to give you CO2. So this is an experiment where you took a pine cube of 10 mm size and just hung it in air at 1100 Kelvin. So this is not a boiler kind of situation, but these are simpler experiments. Okay. Right, there is another one. Now this is for coal particle. The last one was for pine wood particle. This is for a coal particle, and this is again mass and reactivity plotted as a function of time. How are we doing these experiments? This coal particle is of 5.3 mm size, and this is like in the previous experiment, placed in an air stream which is at 1100 Kelvin. The air flow rate is small. It's just about 2 meters per second. Okay, so imagine hanging this particle with a quartz fiber maybe, and then you have hot air which is flowing across the particle. What are you measuring? Like in the video that we saw, mass essentially, mass as a function of time. The whole thing can be placed on a weighing balance and you can get mass as a function of time. So you will see that this is how the mass comes down. This is how the mass comes down for that particle, 5.3 mm particle, and this is how the reactivity changes. Now what is reactivity? Look at the unit of reactivity. This is milligram per second gram. How does that come? What is reactivity here?
Changing mass per unit time and by initial mass.
By initial mass. So it's what I just now told you. It's 1 over mi into dm dt, m being the instantaneous mass. So the solid curve that you see in this plot, in this figure 14.3, that gives you just the mass. So the unit is mg. Okay, unit is milligram. The second one is the derivative of that curve, and then that shows you this reactivity here. So there is a sudden change, right? The initial part you see that there is a fast rate of mass loss, and then the mass loss goes down. So if you think about it, this must be because it had strong pyrolysis to begin with, and it had a flame around it, and then the flame got extinguished, and then it became just char combustion sort of situation. So again, remember the experiment that we saw in that video? That was for wood particle, but it had this initially once ignited, it had the flame around it. After some time, the flame went off. Once the flame went off, it became just a glowing particle. So this was burning, but burning actually more slowly. Here, in this situation, we have this drop. This drop is fast. We didn't do the experiment, so we don't have that visual information of when the flame came and things like that, but we can conjecture from here. We can conjecture that this must have been the pyrolysis part with the flame. So there is a volatile flame. Then the volatile flame probably got extinguished, and that's why this change in slope here. And then it became much slower process. This is very fast, this is much slower. And if you do the reactivity, then the reactivity curve actually shows you more dramatically how the rate of mass loss actually comes down. Okay, so that is when the flame has gone off. There's another one. So this is again for coal particle, and there are two coal particles. The upper one is 10 mm size, 675 mg mass, and the lower one is 100 mg mass, 5.3 mm. Okay. And you will see that the bigger particle loses mass, the smaller particle also loses mass, both of them lose mass. What is being plotted? Normalized mass. Why are we plotting normalized mass? Makes sense because we are making a comparison. Since we are making a comparison of two particles of different sizes, it's always better to plot the normalized mass so that you get a 0 to 1 range on the y-axis. So you can see that, and plotted of course as a function of time. So, you will see that the larger particle actually is losing mass at a slower rate, isn't it? So, is that expected? Or what do you think? If you have a smaller particle, then what will happen?
More area of contact with oxide.
Yeah, so it's unlikely to develop much temperature gradient. It has less thermal mass, m into Cp, so it will quickly get heated. And if it gets heated quickly, then it will release volatiles quickly. It will establish the volatile flame quickly, and then it will lose mass also faster. That is what is happening. The bigger one loses mass more slowly. Yeah, this is what we learned from all this.
Coal size 10 millimeter, that means it's cube.
Yeah, 10 mm on each side, 10 mm on each side. I don't know how well they could they can maintain 10 mm on each side, the uncertainty, etc. I don't know that, but I think that's not so much important for our purpose. The other point that I'd like to make is if we go back to the first plot. So this is from a paper actually. This is from a paper by Ragland and Yang, which was published in the journal called Combustion and Flame. And I got it from this set of plots I got from this book, which is called Combustion Engineering, and written by Borman and Ragland. So here, coming back to this plot, pyrolysis is roughly ending here, okay, from what we can see from the change of slope. So if you go up like this, you will know that at the end of pyrolysis, the mass is actually 45%, isn't it? The initial mass is 100 mg, 100 mg has become 45 mg, correct? So it has lost that much amount of mass because the volatile matter escaped and burnt in a flame. But there's one interesting thing here. I think they did a proximate analysis of this bituminous coal particle also. And I don't remember the percentage that they quoted, but that was probably more like 30-40%. Okay, was the volatile matter content. Now we didn't discuss it, but what is the proximate analysis? You probably know, some of you, isn't it? If you studied course like applied thermodynamics or maybe energy conversion, isn't it? Then there is discussion of proximate analysis of solid fuels and ultimate analysis of solid fuels. So what does it give, proximate analysis? It gives you fixed carbon, volatile matter, ash, things like that. And what is ultimate analysis? Different elements like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, things like that. So the proximate analysis is done actually under some specified conditions. You take a small sample in a crucible and heat it in an oven at a particular temperature, keep it there at some temperature, things like that. So that tells you that the volatile matter in the coal is much lower. Again, I forgot the percentage, but it's much lower than 55. Okay, much lower. But here it has lost 55% of the mass, isn't it? 55% of the mass because of pyrolysis. How do I know? I am going up from this point, and if I go up from this point, I arrive here roughly, which is 45 mg, correct? So that means 55 mg has been lost, that is 55% of the mass has been lost because of pyrolysis, devolatilization. But proximate analysis predicted much less. So what is the reason behind this? If you are working in a power plant and the coal has 20% volatile matter, by virtue of proximate analysis, in actual boiler combustion, it may give you much more volatile matter than that 20%. Okay. So what is different between what you do in a proximate analysis and what you do in an experiment like this where you hang the particle in 1100 Kelvin? What do you think will change? Temperature is much higher. Okay. In the proximate analysis, you do it at relatively lower temperatures. Take a small amount of mass, keep it in a crucible, heat it in an oven, hold it at that temperature for some length of time. This is how you do. And then you see how much mass loss is taking place. But here it is 1100 Kelvin flame. and small particle. So the particle is getting heated at a very high rate. So it's not just the temperature, but also the heating rate which matters. Heating rate. If you increase the heating rate, in fact, you will get more volatile matter. That's what happened in this case. That's what, of course, is also going to happen in the pulverized coal combustion situation in a boiler. Okay, so for a minute, we'll go back to this picture that I was drawing on the slide. So think about these particles. Where are they? They are here, right? Flowing into the boiler, carried by the primary air. Fine. As these particles are moving, these particles are losing volatile matter. Why are they losing volatile matter? Because they are getting heated. Okay. Heating leads to the thermal breakdown of long chain molecules into smaller chain molecules and produce these hydrocarbons and various species which we call volatile matter. So this is heating. This is heating which is doing this. The heating is resulting in the particles losing their volatile matter content. Okay? But who is doing the heating? If you look at the picture, who is doing the heating? This is the flame. Okay. Who set up the flame? Yeah, you did. Maybe initially you supported with the help of an oil gun or something to just start the process, isn't it? Actually, in one of the pictures which we saw in the last class for the flare burner, not the tangential one, the other one, remember the middle there was the center line, there was a oil gun also to set up the initial ignition. So somehow we have set up this flame, right? This flame, in this flame what is burning? Yeah, don't say coal. Volatile matter. So we want to discriminate more, isn't it? I said in the last class that, okay, if you say coal burning in boiler, that's not a very good answer. We want better answers than that. So what is burning in the flame? Volatile matter, right? So you've set up the flame. Maybe you have assisted the situation by setting up, by spraying oil or using a gas flame or something. Initially you started off the flame. So you created this flame zone, and this flame is actually heating the incoming particles. Think about a particle which is entering. Think about, okay, this is a coal nozzle again. These particles, okay, one particle comes. As it moves, it's not the same particle anymore because it keeps getting heated. Who is heating? This flame zone, this entire flame zone is heating, it's pumping in heat. So the particle gets heated. It's getting heated at a rate which is high because the flame temperature actually is quite high. Okay. So the heating rate in an actual boiler situation is much higher than what heating rate you will get in a proximate analysis that you do in a lab. So if you work in a thermal power plant, and many engineers do, for example, and most thermal power plants in India, of course, run on coal, and they routinely do proximate analysis, and then they see how much volatile matter is there. So that proximate analysis is good, and it has to be done all the time because the coal supply keeps changing, the coal quality will keep changing. They may get coal from different mines. Sometimes they may even blend coals and things like that. But as they do proximate analysis, if they get 20% volatile matter in one coal sample, if they get 25% in another coal sample, that is good in the sense that they can compare the volatile matter content in the different coals. But it doesn't mean that the first coal will give you exactly 20% of its mass in the form of volatile matter when it actually burns in the boiler. In fact, it will be much higher than that. Okay, so that 20% is in fact indicative of something. It tells you something. It tells you that this one will give you less, 20% will give you less compared to the other coal which is 25%. Okay, that's all it can tell you, but it cannot tell you exactly how much volatile matter release will take place in the boiler because the heating rates are in fact much higher. Okay, so that I thought is a good thing to know. And coming back to this plot, this is what I was saying that this loses about 55% of the mass because of pyrolysis. So what do we learn from here? We learned that the approximate analysis is only indicative. It doesn't tell you exactly what will happen. Volatile matter loss can be much more. And from the second plot, what did we learn? We learned that if you have a bigger size, then the rate of mass loss can be less. So if you make smaller particles, they will get heated up faster. They will lose mass faster. They'll be easier to burn because the burning rates will be higher. That's what we have learned. Now, one can do an analysis of the drying process and the pyrolysis process and write approximate equations and actually get down to determining a T dry. This is the drying time. And it can also get a TPYR, which is a pyrolysis time. Okay. Drying time is the time to lose almost all its moisture for a particle, and the pyrolysis time is similarly the time required to lose all its volatile matter. Okay. Let's also, since we are on this topic, let's also appreciate one fact here, that volatile matter is as such not contained in the coal, isn't it? It gets produced because of heating. Coal as such, if you just get a piece of coal, it doesn't have volatile matter. Because of heating, the long chain molecule gets broken up, and then you get the volatile matter. So let's remember that. Now I'll just briefly tell you about a nice description that I found in this book by Borman and Ragland about what happens to a pulverized coal particle in a boiler. So I'll just read this out. It says that let's take an example of a 100 micron coal particle which flows through the burner nozzle and encounters a 1400 degree Celsius flame. So he's talking about coal particle. He's talking about one particle which is, let's say this one, which is 100 micron size, and it flows through the burner nozzle. So let's follow that one. That 100 micron one is going this way, and it encounters a 1400 degree Celsius flame zone. So this temperature can be lower than this also, but 1400 degrees Celsius is not a bad number. In less than 1 millisecond, okay, now he's talking about time. In less than 1 millisecond, the particle reaches 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, 1 millisecond is a very short time, right? So it reaches 100 degrees Celsius, and the moisture is drawn off. So the moisture goes. Of course, we have to remember that the particle, when it was coming through this, this is a particle along with primary air. Okay, coal particles along with primary air. The primary air is also preheated to some extent, 75, 80 degrees Celsius. So the particles were already dry, already lost some part of the moisture. So it loses all its moisture in about 1 millisecond. So the moisture is drawn off by 1 millisecond.
So from which position the time he has started to count? From which position 1 millisecond?
I think what he says is that from the point it reaches the burner, exit of the burner nozzle. So that's about 1 millisecond. But these are kind of approximate numbers, isn't it? So when he writes 1 millisecond, we should take it in the spirit that, okay, it's of the order of a millisecond or so. It can be more, can be less. So in that short length of time, it actually has lost all its moisture. So this T dry, which I was talking about, the drying time is of the order of 1 millisecond. And so in 1 millisecond, by the end of 1 millisecond, it says okay, in less than 1 millisecond particle reaches 100 degrees Celsius. It's actually, it doesn't say 1 milli at the end of 1 millisecond. In less than 1 millisecond, the particle reaches 100 degrees Celsius, and he says that by 1 millisecond, that is at the end of 1 millisecond, the particle reaches 400 degrees Celsius, and the volatile gases and tars start to be forced out of the particle. So the other word which I just now mentioned is tar. Now what is tar? Tar is also that volatile matter, but it is such that it can get actually, it can go and condense and deposit on surfaces. Okay. So by when it reaches 400 degrees Celsius, the volatile gases are mostly going out. Now, other thing that happens is, if it is a bituminous coal, swelling bituminous coal, then plastic flow occurs. So it can actually also swell. See, we might think that this is 100 micron, this is a certain size. As it moves, it's losing its volatile matter. So your tendency will be to think that it will become smaller. But it need not necessarily be, because of two reasons. One is that it may be losing volatile matter but remaining porous and roughly maintaining the same size. That is possible. Okay, it's just losing some material, but the outer diameter doesn't really change much. So that's one possibility. But if the particular coal that you have has a tendency to swell, then it can also expand. It can become bigger. So now you understand why solid fuel combustion is so difficult. In fact, what we are saying here, that 100 micron size, that's like saying that it can be characterized by just one dimension. That is true if it is a spherical particle, but it need not be a spherical particle. In fact, it's not. Okay, so it has some complex shape maybe. So it may not be spherical, and we are not sure whether the particle size has decreased or remained roughly the same, or because of swelling it has increased. It's very hard to say these things. But after 10 milliseconds, the particle has reached about 1000 degrees Celsius. 10 milliseconds, 1000 degrees Celsius, and devolatilization is complete. So it has lost all its volatile matter. So when it was at 400 degrees Celsius, it had lost quite a bit, but not fully. So about 900 degrees Celsius, 1000 degrees Celsius, at about that temperature, it is completely devoid of volatile gases. And approximately 50% of the particle weight is released. So it has lost about half the weight. Why? We have seen this plot a few minutes back, isn't it? 55% of the weight gone because of devolatilization. So maybe 50% is gone. And porosity has been established. The particle may have become much more porous. So when we were talking about liquid droplets, there was a good thing. Like we could say that this is a droplet, and it is spherical, so that's not a bad approximation. Of course, it's not bad. Okay, it's spherical, and then it keeps becoming smaller, isn't it? We calculated ddt of diameter. In fact, we calculated ddt of d squared, but okay, we can do ddt of diameter. So the diameter is actually changing. There is for droplet we call it a surface regression rate. So it is spherical and it is reducing. Usually there is not much complication in the sense that usually we can say that gases are not getting dissolved in the liquid. So we made that approximation. We said that gases do not get dissolved in the liquid. We said such things. And we didn't have to bother too much about what is happening inside of the droplet. But see, if you have a coal particle, it's more complicated because, okay, even if you say it's spherical, from interior at different places, it's losing volatile matter. Volatile matter is going out. And as they go out, they leave all these pores here. And 50% of the weight is gone, so it has become a porous structure. And 1000 degrees Celsius, approximately 50% of the particle weight is gone. and the initial char particle size is equal to or greater than the original cold particle sizes at this point. Okay, size meaning essentially the outer dimension. Even though it has become porous, it is still approximately the same size as the original one, and can be even larger because of swelling and heating, thermal expansion, things like that. And what can happen then? Once the volatile matter is gone, and that volatile matter has helped that outer flame, that flame zone, right, which heated the particle. Now what will happen? Now we want char oxidation, because we want to use the heating value that we have in the carbon. What is char? Char is mostly carbon. So that carbon has to burn. How will that burn? You can have oxygen coming into the particle. If oxygen can come into the particle and attack the carbon of the char, then you can get C plus O2 reaction. So maybe C plus half O2 will give you CO. That is char oxidation. Okay, so oxygen has to reach now. In fact, when a lot of volatile matter is coming out, then it's a little difficult for oxygen to go and attack the solid. Here, this carbon is solid. Carbon is solid, okay, of course. And oxygen is of course gaseous. See, it has to come and attack the solid carbon. Where will it attack? It can attack at the surface, or it can seep in and attack at the various sites where porosities are. Wherever it gets a scope, wherever it sees the solid, it can attack. Okay, it will do that by moving in through that complex structure of the particle, complex porous structure of the particle. So to do that, what I was saying is that when the volatile matter is coming out and porosity is getting established, it's little difficult for the oxygen to actually come and attack the carbon, because there is competition. This is the particle, volatile matter going out. It's little difficult for the oxygen to come and attack the carbon at the same time. Once the volatile matter flow stops or has reduced to considerable extent, then the oxygen finds it easier to go and attack the solid of the carbon, the solid of the char. And once it starts doing that, then this sort of reaction will start taking place. Carbon plus oxygen giving you carbon monoxide, let's say. All right, coming back to this story. Now oxygen can reach the particle surface and char burning begins. So between 0.01 second and 1 second, we were at 10 milliseconds, right? At 1 millisecond, it had reached 400 degrees Celsius, lost some volatile matter. And at the end of 10 millisecond, it reaches 1000 degrees Celsius and it has lost almost all volatile matter. So 10 milliseconds is 0.01 second. So between 0.01 second and 1 second, char burn continues, and the particle surface temperature is several hundred degrees Celsius higher than the gas temperature due to surface reaction with oxygen. Okay. So this is another time scale. This is for the last time scale, we call it maybe TC. This is for char combustion. So what we just now heard is that drying time plus pyrolysis time together is just about 0.01 second. Okay, and the char combustion time is at 1 second minus 0.01 second, which is like 1 second. Fine. So this is of the order of the char combustion time is of the order of 1 second. The char will burn much more slowly. So he says that between 0.01 second and 1 second, char burn continues and the particle surface temperature is several hundred degrees Celsius higher than the gas temperature due to surface reaction with oxygen. So the surface temperature is higher than the gas temperature by a few hundred degrees Celsius. Why? Because the carbon plus oxygen reaction that takes place, giving you carbon monoxide or maybe even carbon dioxide, that's exothermic, so that releases heat, and that makes sure that the surface temperature is in fact higher than the gas temperature, okay, by a few hundred degrees Celsius. So if the surrounding gas temperature is 1200 degrees Celsius, this can be 1300 degrees Celsius. This has some importance, I will come to that. Now after 0.5 second, half of the char is consumed. Fissures are formed in the char particle. So there are some cracks in the char particle. Porosity has increased because the oxygen is coming and eating up the carbon of the char. So there's more porosity. And the physical structure is becoming weaker, so there are the fissures. Fissures are cracks. Okay. And the porosity has increased and the particle has begun to shrink in size. The mineral matter, which is dispersed throughout the char in nodules, small things here, small nodules, mostly less than 2 microns in size, becomes molten, and trace metals in the mineral matter volatilize. Then many molten mineral matter nodules agglomerate into a few nodules, and toward the later stages of char burnout, the char may fragment into several pieces. All right. Coal also has mineral matter. Okay. Now, once the volatile matter is gone, once the moisture is gone, what does it have? It has got carbon, maybe small amount of hydrogen, as I told you, and it has got mineral matter. So now this char oxidation is taking place, and the temperature is going up inside the particle because of this heterogeneous reaction. Carbon plus oxygen giving you carbon monoxide. This is a heterogeneous reaction. It produces heat in the particle, making the temperature higher than the gas temperature. And that does something to the mineral matter. Mineral matter is dispersed in small things within the matrix of the particle. So they melt and then they agglomerate, and then these things actually produce ash. All right? So that's why I said that the surface reaction producing higher temperatures is actually important, because that is helping produce that ash and even melting the ash. Okay, so then he goes into some more details of this about ash formation, which I think we can forego. We need not discuss that in detail. But we understand this, that this whole thing is 0.01 second here, and this is about 1 second. These numbers are not sacrosanct. This is for a bituminous coal particle of 100 micron size in a boiler where the flame zone is at 1400 degrees Celsius. All right? What I was showing? 100 micron, 1400 degrees Celsius, bituminous coal. These numbers are not sacrosanct. This 0.01 second, 1 second, these numbers are not sacrosanct. In fact, they will not apply for Indian coal. This is most likely for an American coal. All right. The numbers will not apply directly, but the order of magnitude will still apply. Indian coal is different. It has more mineral matter producing a lot of ash. So Indian coal has this problem. So some numbers will be different, but it's okay still to say that for a 100 micron sort of size of coal, the char burning time is probably of the order of 1 second. And 1 second is a lot of time. Okay. Because the other times are of the order of milliseconds. Yes.
Ash completely devoid of carbon, or some unburnt will be remaining?
If the ash gets to trap some carbon particle, that's another issue. But ash, as such, what we talk about ash is it doesn't have carbon. Okay. So we will hopefully we can look at the ash composition. Actually, we should be possible to do that in the next lecture. Fine. But if if the charred particle gets covered with some molten layer of ash, then that charred particle, that carbon part of it may not burn properly, and then it can go out as an unburnt with a covering of molten ash. Okay, but that doesn't mean that ash contains carbon. All right.
And what about soot, that is solid particle, carbon particle that is not burnt, right? That is
Okay, his question is about soot. Now, soot and char, what is the difference? Char has carbon, soot has carbon. But what is the difference? So, going back to this candle situation, candle produces soot, we know that, and the fuel was molten wax which vaporized. Okay. Did the fuel have carbon? Yes, but in the form of hydrocarbon, right? Maybe a C20 hydrocarbon. Did it have solid carbon in it? No, it didn't have solid carbon. It is here, it is solid. The fuel is solid here. It is a hydrocarbon, but then it melts here, forming that molten pool. The molten wax rises. Then before it burns, it actually becomes fuel vapor. Okay, so there is no solid carbon in that fuel. Even this doesn't have solid carbon, right? It's solid C20 hydrocarbon, or maybe C16 hydrocarbon, whatever. It doesn't have carbon. If it had a lot of carbon, do you think it would have had the color that it has? It's whitish color? Would not have had. Okay. So who is getting this carbon? The flame itself is producing that carbon. Okay. Which actually is a beautiful thing, because if you think about it, it's all vapor and it's all oxygen, everything in the gaseous phase. The reaction takes place in the gaseous phase in the flame. So in fact, this situation is that of homogeneous combustion, isn't it? Homogeneous combustion, because the fuel vapor is reacting with oxygen all around the gaseous phase. That's how combustion is taking place. So that is the main thing that we are talking about when you were talking about the candle. But think about it, when we have this flame here, we also know that the fuel vapor, when it goes towards the flame, on its way it keeps thermally breaking down, and actually something starts happening. It produces this polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and then some of them react in complex fashion to give you finally soot. Okay. Why is it beautiful? Because it's actually hard to imagine that all these vapors are doing something and finally it's condensing in the form of a condensed phase and giving you solid particles. It was all vapor, right, everywhere. It's doing something to produce a solid. Okay. So those carbon particles are generated in the flame. Those are not directly there in the fuel, whereas in the boiler situation that we were talking about, the particles were there. You took the coal, you pulverized it. There are ball mills, okay? There are pulverizers in power plant where you break the coal particles into this micron size, 70 micron, 100 micron, 120 micron, whatever, and then you are sending them. And those particles, those coal particles, have lost other things to become more like carbon. Okay, so that is the difference. They didn't get produced in the flame zone. All right, I think we will close this discussion, and then we'll meet for the final lecture of this course in the afternoon. Okay, thank you.